1919. The Chicago White Sox are, on paper, one of the greatest teams ever assembled, heavy favorites heading into the World Series against the Cincinnati Reds. But underneath the record, the clubhouse is quietly furious. Owner Charles Comiskey is notoriously cheap, even by the standards of an era when players had almost no leverage at all, bound to their teams for life by something called the reserve clause, with no right to negotiate elsewhere. Star players are earning a fraction of what the sport is generating, and a group of gamblers has noticed exactly how resentful this locker room really is. First baseman Chick Gandil makes the first move, reaching out to a small-time gambler named Sport Sullivan with an offer that sounds almost too simple: $10,000, split among the players who agreed to lose. Within days, 7 more players are in. Behind Sullivan, bigger money is circling, including, by several accounts, the biggest gambling financier in New York, a man named Arnold Rothstein, whose name will follow this story for the next century. The nickname Black Sox actually predates the scandal by months. Comiskey was so notoriously stingy that he charged his own players a fee to have their uniforms laundered, so some of them simply stopped washing them. Reporters started calling them the Black Sox as a joke about dirty jerseys, long before anyone knew just how dark that name would eventually become. Under the reserve clause, none of these players could simply leave for a better paying club, even if one existed. They belonged to Comiskey for as long as he wanted them, at whatever salary he chose to pay. 8 players are in on it, or at least aware of it, by the time the series starts. Pitchers Eddie Cicotte and Claude "Lefty" Williams, infielders Chick Gandil, Swede Risberg, and Fred McMullen, outfielders Happy Felsch and shoeless Joe Jackson, and third baseman Buck Weaver, who never took a dollar, but who sat in the room while it was arranged, a detail that will matter enormously later. The money moves through a chain of middlemen, which is part of why it unravels so messily. Boxer-turned-fixer Abe Attell tells the players he's speaking for Rothstein, while Rothstein himself will spend the rest of his life publicly denying he financed any of it, a denial history has never fully settled. Promised payments arrive late, in smaller amounts than agreed, sometimes not at all. By the time the series starts, several players aren't even sure how much money is actually coming or from whom. 8 players are in on it, or at least aware of it. By the time the series starts, pitchers Eddie Cicotte and Claude "Lefty" Williams, infielders Chick Gandil, Swede Risberg, and Fred McMullen, outfielders Happy Felsch and shoeless Joe Jackson, and third baseman Buck Weaver, who never took a dollar, but who sat in the room while it was arranged, a detail that will matter enormously later. Almost immediately, sports writers smell something wrong. Hugh Fullerton, one of the most respected baseball writers in the country, starts asking questions publicly within weeks. Nobody listens. Baseball's biggest scandal is about to sit in plain sight, unpunished, for an entire year. Game by game, the fix is inconsistent enough to almost hide itself. Cicotte gives up hit after hit in Game 1. Lefty Williams loses 3 separate starts, a World Series record that still stands. But shoeless Joe Jackson bats .375 for the entire series, the best average of any player on either team, which is exactly why his role in the fix is still argued over a century later. He took money by his own admission, but his bat never actually seemed to miss on purpose. Almost immediately, sports writers smell something wrong. Hugh Fullerton, one of the most respected baseball writers in the country, starts asking questions publicly within weeks. Nobody listens. Baseball's biggest scandal is about to sit in plain sight, unpunished, for an entire year. Fullerton doesn't let it go. Working with retired pitching great Christy Mathewson, he spends the following season quietly circling suspicious plays on scorecards, building a private case no editor will fully print. Baseball's own leadership isn't much more receptive. The sport is run at the time by a toothless 3-man national commission with no real power to investigate its own players, which is precisely the vacuum an outside commissioner will soon be built to fill. For 12 months, it works. The players go back to their regular lives. And then, in the fall of 1920, a completely unrelated fixed game, nothing to do with the White Sox, triggers a grand jury investigation into gambling's grip on baseball. And that grand jury starts pulling threads that lead directly back to the 1919 series. And then something strange happens. By the time the case reaches trial in the summer of 1921, the signed confessions have mysteriously disappeared from the court files, along with waivers of immunity the players had signed. Without that paperwork, prosecutors can't make the case stick the way they should be able to. In August 1921, a jury acquits all 8 men. The confessions don't stay secret for long. Newspapers print large portions of what Sicott and Jackson told the grand jury within days, which means the players' own words are public well before any trial even begins, and gives defense lawyers an opening to later argue the men can't get a fair hearing. And then something strange happens. By the time the case reaches trial in the summer of 1921, the signed confessions have mysteriously disappeared from the court files, along with waivers of immunity the players had signed. Without that paperwork, prosecutors can't make the case stick the way they should be able to. In August 1921, a jury acquits all 8 men. One detail rarely makes the highlight reel. Several of the players' defense lawyers were quietly paid for by Charles Comiskey himself, the same owner they'd conspired against. Some historians believe he wanted an acquittal just as badly as the players did, since a not guilty verdict meant he could argue his roster's trade value hadn't collapsed. It didn't matter. Landis was about to make the courtroom's verdict irrelevant anyway. The day after the acquittal, Landis banned all 8 players from professional baseball for life, regardless of the verdict, regardless of guilt or innocence in the legal sense. Even Buck Weaver, who took no money and played to win every single game, was banned simply for knowing about the plot and staying silent. Weaver spent the rest of his life petitioning to be reinstated. He never was. The day after the acquittal, Landis banned all 8 players from professional baseball for life, regardless of the verdict, regardless of guilt or innocence in the legal sense. Even Buck Weaver, who took no money and played to win every single game, was banned simply for knowing about the plot and staying silent. Weaver spent the rest of his life petitioning to be reinstated. He never was. The other banned players scattered into obscurity. Some played for years under fake names in outlaw semi-pro leagues, for a fraction of their old salaries. Chick Gandil, the player who first proposed the fix, eventually admitted the whole scheme publicly in a 1956 magazine interview, decades after baseball had already closed the book on all 8 men for good. Joe Jackson finished his career with a lifetime batting average of .356, third best in the history of the sport at the time. He is still not in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and the debate over whether he belongs there hasn't stopped in over 100 years. The commissioner's office Landis built by necessity in 1920 is the same institution running baseball's discipline today. Every suspension, every investigation, every best interests of the game ruling traces its authority back to the decision made in the wake of this exact scandal. The Black Sox didn't just lose a World Series. They created the entire system built to make sure it couldn't happen quietly again. A century later, the irony is hard to miss. Sports betting is now legal, advertised, and built directly into modern broadcasts. The very thing that destroyed 8 careers in 1919 is now a sponsor, which is exactly why, when a modern gambling scandal breaks, and it still does regularly, the first name reporters reach for is always the Black Sox. The full case file, every player's exact role, the gamblers who financed it, and what happened to each of the 8 men afterward is linked below. If you want to know which scandal we're opening next, subscribe. There's a new file every Tuesday and Friday.